dem Allmächtigen und Allwissenden,
that I will speak the pure truth.
As the supreme commander of Axis forces in Stalingrad, Field Marshal Frederick Von Palus gave the order to eradicate every civilian during the infamous Battle of Stalingrad. Following the battle, Friedrich Paulus, formerly a highly regarded field marshal, found himself captured and ostracized. His journey post-Stalingrad is a mosaic of resistance, survival, and transformation. We are committed to revealing the genuine reasons behind the Nazi commander's choice for life over anticipated honor and how his decisions altered his legacy in the challenging post-war era. What happened to Friedrich Paulus after Stalingrad? Let's delve into the untold story of Friedrich Paulus's life after Stalingrad's post-battle to find out. From field marshal to prisoner. The Battle of Stalingrad, a brutal confrontation on the Eastern Front of World War II, unfolded as a pivotal moment, not only in the course of the war, but also in the life of Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus. As the battle reached its inevitable conclusion on January 31, 1943, Hitler promoted Paulus to the rank of Field Marshal. However, this promotion was not merely a recognition of his military prowess. It carried an implicit directive to choose death over capture, as no German field marshal had ever been taken prisoner. Paulus faced a critical decision: to adhere to the expected honor of death or to defy convention and surrender. Despite the grim circumstances and the prevalent Nazi ideology that valorized self-sacrifice, Paulus made a shocking choice. He surrendered to the Soviets, becoming the first field marshal in German history to be captured alive. The moments following his surrender were a mix of disbelief and harsh reality. Paulus, who had led an army of 260,000 at the start of the Battle of Stalingrad, was now a prisoner, leaving behind 91,000 of his men. The surrender was not just a military defeat. It was a symbolic blow that shook the very foundations of the Nazi regime's invincibility myth. Paulus, along with Lieutenant General Schmidt, his chief of staff, now faced the daunting prospect of interrogation by the Soviets. The decision to surrender marked not only a military defeat but also the beginning of a profound personal journey for Paulus. His transition from a celebrated field marshal leading one of the most powerful armies to a captive reflected the complexities and nuances of human decisions during times of conflict. Transported in his own vehicle with personal belongings, Paulus was granted certain privileges amid the harshness of war. His destination was a special camp near Moscow, a place that served as both sanctuary and cell. Under the watchful eyes of the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, Paulus's daily life became a series of interrogations and surveillance. These sessions were not mere attempts to extract military intelligence. They formed part of a larger Soviet strategy to use Paulus as a tool in their propaganda war against Nazi Germany. Every word and action by Paulus underwent scrutiny. As a captive, the psychological transformation he underwent during these years was profound. Once an ardent supporter of Hitler's army, Paulus began to introspect and reevaluate his beliefs and allegiances. The harsh reality of the war, the nature of the regime he had served, and the fate of his men weighed heavily on him. The period of reflection and captivity led to a gradual yet significant shift in his views. The Nuremberg trials post-war marked another pivotal moment in Paulus's life. Here, he stood not as a victor, but as a witness and a defendant, testifying against the regime he once served. His statements during the trials were a stark departure from his previous persona, as he openly criticized the war strategies and decisions of the Nazi leadership, including Hitler himself. Paulus's defiance of the expectations set upon him to die at Stalingrad showcased his willingness to choose life over the anticipated honor of death. His subsequent journey from a field marshal leading one of the most powerful armies to a prisoner reflecting on the ruins of his choices was marked by a complexity that defied simple categorization as either a traitor or a hero. Life in Soviet captivity further shaped Paulus's narrative. Initially sent to a special camp near Moscow, reserved for high-ranking prisoners, he experienced a paradoxical treatment. On one hand, he enjoyed certain privileges due to his rank, such as keeping personal items and better living conditions. On the other hand, constant surveillance by the NKVD, meticulously documenting his every move, emphasized the psychological pressure and re-education he underwent. Intense interrogation sessions were not only inquiries into military tactics or information, they were strategically designed to erode his loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi regime. Paulus became a pawn in the Soviets' propaganda war, with the interrogations aimed at making him renounce his past allegiances publicly. Exposed to the broader context and impact of the war, Paulus confronted evidence of Nazi atrocities, including the Holocaust. This exposure played a crucial role in his gradual transformation. The once loyal commander of Hitler's army began questioning the cause he had fought for, and the leadership he had followed so devotedly. Interactions with other German prisoners, many of whom had served under him, also contributed to Paulus's changing worldview. These encounters, filled with a mix of respect, resentment, and disillusionment, provided him with a ground-level view of the war's impact on individual lives. Stories of suffering, loss, and betrayal from fellow prisoners fueled his re-evaluation of the Nazi regime and his role in it. Recognizing the symbolic value of Paulus, the Soviet authorities gradually increased his exposure to Soviet society. Carefully orchestrated tours showcased the USSR's post-war reconstruction efforts and ideological superiority. These experiences were a stark contrast to the Nazi propaganda that had shaped his view of the Soviet Union, revealing the nuances of the conflicting narratives presented to him. The failed assassination attempt on Hitler in July 1944 marked another turning point in Paulus's captivity. The involvement of respected military figures in the plot, whom Paulus knew and admired, made him reassess his loyalty to the Führer. The realization that respected colleagues were actively resisting Hitler's regime shattered the last remnants of his allegiance to Nazi ideology. As World War II drew to a close, Paulus's role shifted from a mere prisoner to a potential asset for the Soviets. He became a witness in the Nuremberg trials, testifying against the Nazi regime. This role required him to confront his past actions and complicity in the Nazi war machine openly. His testimonies at Nuremberg, where he openly criticized Hitler and the Nazi leadership, were a culmination of the transformation that had begun in the solitude of his prison cell. Paulus's decision to live rather than die at Stalingrad defied the expectations set upon him. His subsequent journey reflected the complexity of his character, etched in shades of gray, revealing the nuanced and often contradictory nature of human decisions in times of conflict. The legacy of Stalingrad continued to cast its shadow over Paulus's post-war life, influencing how he was perceived and how he perceived himself. The battle, known for its unprecedented brutality and strategic significance, had ended in a disastrous defeat for the German Sixth Army. This defeat not only marked a turning point in the war, but also signified a personal failure for Paulus. The surrender, a decision he made to save lives, was seen by many as an act of cowardice and betrayal. In the years that followed, Paulus tried to navigate his new life in the German Democratic Republic. The memories of Stalingrad continued to haunt him, bringing him back to public attention not for his later anti-Nazi stance or contributions to post-war discussions, but for his role in one of the most devastating battles in history. The scars of war, both physical and psychological, were vivid reminders of the immense human toll exacted by the conflict. Paulus became a living testament to the complexities of morality, loyalty, and survival during times of war. The personal transformation that began in Soviet captivity reached a critical juncture during Paulus's testimonies at the Nuremberg trials. Here, he not only denounced the actions of the Nazi regime, but also laid bare the inner workings of a military apparatus driven by blind obedience and ideological fervor. His testimony highlighted the internal conflicts within the German military hierarchy and the widespread disillusionment that eventually led to resistance against Hitler. Paulus's role in the failed July 1944 assassination attempt on Hitler became a significant chapter in his post-war narrative. The discovery that high-ranking military figures, including those he admired, were actively seeking to overthrow Hitler shattered the last remnants of his loyalty to the Führer. This revelation marked a profound shift in Paulus's perspective, further distancing him from the ideology that had once bound him. As the Nuremberg trials unfolded, Paulus found himself in a delicate balancing act. On one hand, he sought to distance himself from the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime. On the other, he faced skepticism and condemnation from those who perceived his surrender at Stalingrad as an act of betrayal. His nuanced testimony reflected not only the intricacies of wartime decision-making, but also the moral reckoning that followed. The aftermath of World War II saw Paulus attempting to rebuild his life amid the complexities of post-war Germany. The division of the country into East and West added another layer of challenge to his existence. Life in Soviet captivity. Life in Soviet captivity for Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus was marked by a complex interplay of confinement, surveillance, and psychological pressure. Initially sent to a special camp near Moscow, designated for high-ranking prisoners, Paulus experienced a stark contrast from his previous role as a commanding officer. In this Soviet captivity, Paulus, despite being a prisoner, received certain privileges due to his rank. He was allowed to keep personal items, and his living conditions were comparatively better than those of the average prisoner. However, this relative comfort was overshadowed by constant surveillance from the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. Every move and conversation of Paulus were meticulously documented, reflecting the Soviet authorities' keen interest in using him as a tool in their propaganda efforts against Nazi Germany. The special camp near Moscow became a place of isolation and reflection for Paulus. Stripped of his power and influence, he had to come to terms with his new status as a prisoner. The environment of the camp, while not overtly hostile, was suffused with the ideology of the victors, challenging Paulus's long-held beliefs at every turn. Interrogation sessions played a very key role in shaping Paulus's daily life in captivity. These sessions were not routine inquiries into military matters. They were strategically designed to erode his loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi regime. The Soviets aimed to make Paulus renounce his past allegiances publicly, using him as a symbol in their propaganda war. Paulus's interactions with fellow German prisoners further contributed to the complexity of his captivity. Many of these prisoners were officers and soldiers who had once served under him, creating a dynamic filled with respect, resentment, and disillusionment. These encounters provided Paulus with a ground-level view of the impact of the war on individual lives, adding another layer to his changing perspective. The psychological transformation of Paulus during his time in Soviet captivity was profound. The once loyal commander of Hitler's army began to introspect and reevaluate his beliefs and allegiances under the immense pressure of captivity. The reality of the war, the nature of the regime he had served, and the fate of his men weighed heavily on him. While the camp offered a degree of isolation, Paulus was not entirely cut off from the outside world. The NKVD's meticulous documentation and surveillance of his every move reflected the Soviet strategy of not only confining him physically, but also influencing his thoughts and beliefs. Life in Soviet captivity for Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus was characterized by a delicate balance between relative comfort and constant surveillance. The special camp near Moscow served as a stage for the interplay of psychological pressure, interrogations, and encounters with fellow prisoners. This period became a transformative chapter in Paulus's life, setting the stage for his later role in the Nuremberg trials and his post-war existence in the German Democratic Republic. The transformation of beliefs. In Soviet captivity, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus underwent a profound transformation of beliefs that reshaped his worldview and ultimately led to his role as a witness in the Nuremberg trials. This transformation unfolded through various stages, marked by isolation, interrogations, exposure to the grim realities of Nazi atrocities, and encounters with fellow German prisoners. Paulus, initially sent to a special camp near Moscow, found himself isolated from the world he once knew. Stripped of his power and influence, he was forced into a position of introspection. The camp's environment, while not overtly hostile, challenged Paulus's long-held beliefs, creating a fertile ground for the seeds of transformation. Despite being a prisoner, Paulus, due to his rank, received certain privileges. However, these were coupled with constant surveillance by the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. Every move and conversation were meticulously documented, highlighting the Soviet strategy to use him as a tool in their propaganda war against Nazi Germany. Interrogation sessions played a crucial role in breaking down Paulus's loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi regime. These were not just inquiries into military matters. They were strategic attempts to make Paulus renounce his past allegiances publicly. The interrogators presented evidence of Nazi atrocities, including the Holocaust, challenging Paulus to reconcile these horrors with the ideals he had once fought for. Paulus's interactions with fellow German prisoners, many of whom had served under him, added depth to his changing worldview. The dynamic between respect, resentment, and disillusionment provided him with a ground-level view of the war's impact on individual lives. These encounters became a catalyst for questioning the cause he had once unflinchingly supported. A turning point in Paulus's ideological journey came with the failed assassination attempt on Hitler in July 1944. Learning about respected military figures actively resisting Hitler shattered any remaining illusions he had about the Führer's leadership. The courage of those who stood against Hitler made Paulus reassess reassess his unwavering loyalty to the regime. As the war neared its end, Paulus's role shifted from a mere prisoner to a potential asset for the Soviets. He became a witness in the Nuremberg trials, a stage where he openly criticized Hitler and the Nazi leadership. This transition from a once celebrated field marshal to a vocal critic marked the culmination of his ideological transformation. Paulus faced accusations of betrayal and disloyalty from fellow Germans, especially those who had served under him. Despite the criticism, he appeared resolute in his new stance. His willingness to live rather than die at Stalingrad became a defiance of the expectations set upon him, highlighting the complexity of his story. The legacy of Paulus's transformation is complex, defying simple categorization as either a traitor or a hero. His participation in the Nuremberg trials, where he openly acknowledged his complicity in the Nazi war effort, challenged the myth of the clean Wehrmacht. His story, much like the war itself, is etched in shades of gray, revealing the nuanced and often contradictory nature of human decisions in times of conflict. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus's transformation of beliefs during Soviet captivity was a multifaceted process influenced by isolation, interrogations, encounters with fellow prisoners, and critical events like the failed assassination attempt on Hitler. This ideological shift played a pivotal role in shaping his role as a witness in the post-war Nuremberg trials, where he openly confronted his past and criticized the Nazi regime. Now, it's time for today's subscriber pick. What really happened to Friedrich Paulus? After Stalingrad, in the aftermath of the Battle of Stalingrad, Friedrich Paulus, once a celebrated field marshal, faced a tumultuous and transformative journey. Captured and isolated, Paulus's fate unfolded in stark contrast to his prior military glory. Stripped of his accolades, he embarked on a path marked by resilience and adaptation. Post-Stalingrad, Paulus grappled with the consequences of defying Nazi expectations. His decision to prioritize life over expected honor raised profound questions about survival in the face of adversity. The complexities of his choices, influenced by the brutality of war and the shifting tides of allegiance, shaped his post-war narrative. Paulus's life after Stalingrad becomes a narrative tapestry woven with threads of defiance against the odds, survival in captivity, and personal transformation. The once celebrated military leader found himself entangled in the complexities of a post-war world, grappling with the repercussions of his decisions and the evolving perceptions of his legacy. What do you think about this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The Nuremberg trials. In the aftermath of World War II, Nuremberg stood as a city with profound symbolism, a place where the Nazi Party had once orchestrated grand rallies. Now it became the stage for a reckoning that would shape the narrative of post-war Germany. Among the key figures present was Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, once a celebrated commander, now a living embodiment of the German military's entanglement with the Nazi regime. As Paulus arrived in Nuremberg, the weight of his past decisions and their consequences pressed heavily upon him. The courtroom, charged with anticipation and trepidation, awaited his testimony. Stripped of the military prestige that had defined him at Stalingrad, he stood as a changed man. When Paulus took the stand, the atmosphere was tense. His testimony unfolded as a damning indictment of the Nazi regime. He spoke candidly, revealing the intricate details of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Yet his words were more than factual statements. They were confessions of a man grappling with guilt and seeking redemption. The courtroom witnessed an open confrontation with his past. Paulus did not shy away from detailing the strategic blunders, unrealistic expectations of Hitler, and the military's knowledge of war crimes. This was a stark departure from the obedient field marshal who had once followed orders without question. The reactions to Paulus's testimony were as varied as the post-war landscape itself. To some, he was a traitor, turning against his country and comrades. This sentiment, particularly strong among his former soldiers and officers, viewed his actions as a betrayal of the military's code of honor. However, for others, Paulus's testimony was an act of courage, a necessary step in exposing the truth about the Nazi regime and its atrocities. His willingness to speak out against former leaders, despite potential backlash, became an essential contribution to the process of reckoning and healing in post-war Germany. Paulus shattered the myth of the clean Wehrmacht, challenging the notion that the German military was innocent of Nazi crimes. Beyond the courtroom, Paulus's testimony became a powerful statement against the myth of Nazi superiority. His revelations highlighted the military's active role in the war, and its consequences. By speaking out, Paulus helped dismantle the narrative that the German military was merely following orders without knowledge or culpability. However, the legacy of the Nuremberg trials was complex, especially for Paulus. His role at the trials contributed to the ongoing controversies surrounding his life. While some admired his courage, others viewed him with suspicion, questioning the sincerity of his transformation. His public appearances were met with a range of reactions, underscoring the struggle to reconcile his past as a high-ranking Nazi officer with his later role as a critic. The Nuremberg trials became a stage where Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus confronted his past, denounced the Nazi regime, and contributed to the broader reckoning of Germany with its wartime actions. His testimony was a turning point in post-war history, challenging established narratives and laying bare the complexities of individual responsibility in the face of tyranny. Return to Germany and life in the German Democratic Republic. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, once a commanding figure in the German military, embarked on a new chapter in his life with his return to Germany in 1953. This marked the beginning of a complex and challenging period as he navigated the divided landscape of post-war Germany, choosing to settle in the German Democratic Republic and facing the intricate web of politics, societal expectations, and personal struggles. Paulus's return unfolded against the backdrop of a Germany divided by the Cold War. The scars of World War II were still fresh, and the nation grappled with the aftermath of its involvement in the conflict. In this fragmented geopolitical scenario, Paulus opted to make his home in Dresden, located in the Soviet-occupied East. This decision was influenced by various factors, including his experiences in the Soviet Union and the complexities of his estrangement from West Germany, where many viewed him as a traitor. Life in the German Democratic Republic, however, was far from straightforward for Paulus. The government, eager to capitalize on his anti-Nazi stance and high-profile persona, extended a cautious welcome. He was often presented as a symbol of repentance and change, a former Nazi who had seen the error of his ways and embraced socialism. The German Democratic Republic saw in Paulus a valuable asset in their efforts to legitimize their regime and promote their version of anti-fascism. Despite the official reception, Paulus found himself under constant surveillance by the Stasi, the East German secret police. The German Democratic Republic leadership, while outwardly welcoming, remained suspicious of his true loyalties. This mistrust was reflected in the restrictions placed on his movements and communications. The complex dance between Paulus and the German Democratic Republic authorities added an extra layer of tension to his already intricate situation. Paulus, determined to carve out a role for himself in his new home, participated in various public events and initiatives. His public appearances often revolved around his experiences during the war, emphasizing the need for peace and reconciliation. The government saw him as a valuable voice to support their political narrative, but Paulus, now a changed man, also used these platforms to express his criticisms of militarism and the dangers of blind obedience to authoritarian regimes. Yet, his public role in the German Democratic Republic was met with mixed reactions. Some admired his willingness to speak out against his past, viewing him as a symbol of redemption. Others, however, perceived him as a pawn of the Soviet regime, a former Nazi being used to further the German Democratic Republic's political agenda. This polarization made it challenging for Paulus to find a stable place in post-war German society. Amidst his public engagements, Paulus faced personal struggles. His health was in decline, and he was haunted by the memories of the war and his role in it. The loss of his family during the war, coupled with the years of separation, weighed heavily on him. His wife Elena had passed away in 1949, and he had been unable to see her before her death due to his captivity. This personal tragedy became a source of deep sorrow and regret for Paulus, adding a layer of complexity to his already tumultuous life in the German Democratic Republic. In addition to his public role, Paulus became entangled in debates about the legacy of the war and the role of individuals in the Nazi regime. The association with Stalingrad continued to cast a long shadow over his reputation. The decision to surrender at Stalingrad, pragmatic as it was to save lives, became a recurring point of criticism against him. This overshadowed his later denunciation of the Nazi regime and his efforts towards peace. Paulus's later years in the German Democratic Republic were marked by a sense of isolation and ambiguity. He was a man caught between worlds, no longer the Nazi Field Marshal, yet not fully embraced by his new home. His decision to settle in the East, while born out of necessity, left him estranged from much of post-war Germany. The return to Germany and life in the German Democratic Republic for Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus encapsulated the complexities of post-war German politics and society. His experiences in the East were a microcosm of the broader struggles of a nation grappling with its past and trying to find a way forward in a divided world. Paulus, once a symbol of Nazi military might, ended his days as a controversial figure, highlighting the turbulent and transformative power of history on individuals. The legacy of Stalingrad. The legacy of Stalingrad looms large over the life of Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, casting a profound and enduring shadow that defines his post-war years and shapes how history remembers him. The Battle of Stalingrad, a brutal and decisive confrontation on the Eastern Front of World War II, became a defining element of Paulus's identity, influencing his actions and perceptions until his death. The battle, marked by unprecedented brutality and strategic significance, ended in a disastrous defeat for the German Sixth Army, which Paulus had commanded. This defeat, coupled with Paulus's decision to surrender, not only marked a turning point in the war, but also signified a personal failure for him. The surrender at Stalingrad, a pragmatic choice made to save the lives of his remaining soldiers, was perceived by many in Germany, especially within the military, as an act of cowardice and betrayal. The stigma of this decision haunted Paulus throughout his post-war life. While it spared the lives of tens of thousands of German soldiers, it also left a lasting mark on Paulus's reputation, overshadowing his later denunciation of the Nazi regime and his efforts towards peace. The association with Stalingrad became both a platform and a burden for Paulus. Public speeches and appearances in the German Democratic Republic often revolved around Stalingrad, providing him with a stage to reflect on the horrors of war and the dangers of blind loyalty to destructive ideologies. However, these reflections were met with mixed reactions. To some, they seemed like attempts at self-justification, a way for Paulus to distance himself from his past actions. To others, they were a welcome contribution to the discourse on war and peace. The legacy of Stalingrad not only impacted Paulus's personal relationships and standing in society, but also influenced how historians and scholars viewed him. His actions during and after the battle were subject to extensive analysis and debate. Some praised his decision to surrender as a humane act in an inhumane situation, acknowledging the impossibility of a military victory and the sparing of lives. Others criticized him for not taking a stand against Hitler earlier, arguing that he could have avoided the catastrophe altogether. This debate reflects the broader complexities of evaluating individual actions in the context of war. In the German Democratic Republic, where Paulus chose to settle upon his return to Germany, the state attempted to use his association with Stalingrad for its own purposes. His presence was seen as a tool to promote the state's anti-fascist narrative, emphasizing his later anti-Nazi stance and high-profile denunciation of the regime. However, this political use of his image only added to the complexity of his legacy, making it difficult to separate the man from the myth. As Paulus became more introspective in his later years, reflecting on the choices he had made, the burden of Stalingrad, the lives lost under his command, and the consequences of his actions weighed heavily on him. His story serves as a reminder of the enduring impact of major historical events on individuals, illustrating how a single decision made under the most extreme circumstances can define a person's life and legacy. In the broader context of post-war Germany, Paulus's legacy became entwined with the nation's collective reckoning with its past. The Battle of Stalingrad, with its devastating outcome and the subsequent debates surrounding Paulus's actions, contributed to a deeper understanding of the moral complexities faced by individuals during times of war. His story highlights the potential for change, even in the most unlikely of people, as he transformed from a celebrated field marshal to a vocal critic of the Nazi regime. Paulus's legacy challenges simplistic narratives and underscores the nuanced nature of human decisions in times of conflict. The Battle of Stalingrad, etched into the pages of history, remains a symbol of both the horrors of war and the complexities of individual agency. Friedrich Paulus, once a revered military commander, spent his post-war years grappling with the consequences of his actions at Stalingrad, reflecting the intricate interplay of history, memory, and individual responsibility. The legacy of Stalingrad, for Paulus and for history, stands as the lasting effects of war, not just on nations and societies, but on the individuals who participate in them. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.